Hello, welcome to my channel. Today I'm casting on the Lakes V-neck by Ozetta. I have been waiting to cast this on for almost a month now while I finish up my whips. You can go watch that video if you haven't. I love a good clean slate before I dive into a new project. And because I'll be so focused on knitting this pretty much monogamously, I want to time how long it takes me to make it. I've only done this a couple times, and it's so hard to answer the question of how long it takes to knit a sweater because there are so many different variables that go into it. So I'm just curious about a pretty basic stockinette worsted weight gauge sweater. I don't think I've timed myself knitting something in this range before, so I'm very curious to see how long it actually takes me. I have already started swatching. I'm not including that in my final time, even though I think in theory it would make sense to include swatching and maybe like picking out the yarn and picking out the pattern as part of the overall project. But I would just like to take a look at how long it takes me to actually knit and then maybe weave in the ends, because there are so many variances in all of these things. Like with the swatching, I've already knit almost 2 full-size swatches and I'm about to knit a third, and you just never know how many swatches you're gonna have to knit and how long it's gonna take to get gauge. So I am excluding that, but I will start my timer once I actually cast on. So the yarn that I'm using is Knitting for Olive. It's the heavy merino and the soft silk mohair. I have knit one sweater out of the heavy merino, and my takeaway from that is I actually wish that I would have held it with the soft silk mohair. Even though I'm not the biggest mohair fan, I do sometimes find it a little itchy. So we're gonna see what this combo is like. The reason I think I'll prefer it with the mohair is that the heavy merino is a little crispy on its own, and I think especially for a sweater like this, it needs something that's going to add a little bit of drape and kind of fill out the stitches. So here is my gauge swatch. As I mentioned, this is the second one that I've knit. This is going down 1 needle size from the pattern, and I'm going to go down 2 sizes. I'm gonna try that out and see if I can get gauge with that. I have only knit one other Ozetta pattern, my port cardigan, and for that I also had to go down 2 needle sizes, so I think Ozetta's gauge is pretty tight compared to mine, but that's totally fine because this was looking a little too loose for me just based on like the fabric. I mean, I do want it to drape, but I think it still will drape even with the tighter gauge because it has the mohair. So I'm gonna go down another needle size to a US 7 and swatch that. I'm very close to the gauge. I am a 1/4 stitch off and a 1/2 row off per inch. So I'm really hoping I don't get too much of a discrepancy between my stitch and row gauge. When I go down a needle size, it's possible my row gauge ends up being a little bit looser, and I think that'll be okay. I just purchased the pattern and kind of looked through it really quickly, and there is a lot up front with this pattern. There's a lot to do to kind of set up all of the shaping. The saddle shoulder is knit in pieces, which I've never done before. I've only ever knit like a contiguous saddle shoulder before. So the yoke is going to be interesting. You knit 2 rectangles for the saddle shoulders, and then you pick up stitches for the front and the back. The reason I bring this up is I am a day away from heading out on a weekend trip. It's a very quick trip to see family. We are leaving early Saturday morning, like 4 a.m. We're traveling for like 14 hours. We're hanging out with them for a day. And then the next day we're coming back home almost another 14 hours. I don't know if this is gonna be a good project to bring on this very fast trip, or if I should bring something that just takes 0 brain power. The reason this would make a good travel project is that it's at the very start of the project. So I'm not bringing something that has a lot of bulk to it because I am packing in just a carry-on. So I really don't have a lot of space. So TBD on if I will bring it with me and how much I'll be able to power through. I always have the greatest ambitions that I'll be knitting for like 10 hours, but that's usually not the case. I'm usually sleeping or just staring into the plain sea in front of me. So what I'm gonna do now is swatch again to try to get gauge. I will block it and let it dry overnight, and then I'll be back to figure out my next steps.
The trip was a whirlwind. We got stuck overnight, so coming home was a really long adventure. But we're home now, and I did decide to take this on the plane, and I cast it on while we were in the air. So the way you get started with this sweater is you knit these like strips back and forth. You knit 2 of them, and these are the saddle shoulders, and then you pick up along both sides and you cast on stitches in the middle between the 2, and then you start working short rows. And now I've started working the arm side increases, and so I'm just going to continue the back yoke, and then I believe I will pick up stitches on the other side for the front. So there's kind of a lot of like things going on with it at the moment. I did not get very far on the plane as I predicted, but I did knit for a few hours between the 2 flights getting there. And then on the way back, I got sick. You can probably hear it a little bit in my voice. It's been about a week since we got home. I got very sick. And just had to like power through working from home for the week. So I really haven't done anything except for like working and just getting the things done that I absolutely need to get done, and then like sleeping for the rest of the time. So I have not gotten very far on my sweater. My stopwatch is at almost 5 hours. So that's how long I've been knitting. I have been diligent about timing myself and making sure that if I'm going to take a pause to do something else, that I also pause my stopwatch. So I've tried to be very accurate about the timing so far. And I feel like this looks like about 5 hours of knitting to me at this gauge. So it's not too surprising. And I like the start of this sweater so far. I think it's been pretty fun, even while traveling and having to look at my pattern and stuff to see what I was supposed to be doing. I found this pretty enjoyable. I like that there's a bit going on with this pattern, at least at the start, because I'm not just casting on and then knitting for 15 inches or whatever. So it's not too boring, even though it is just stockinette. There's enough going on and that I have to keep track of, that it has been really fun so far. The thing I dislike about this is that there are so many ends to weave in already. I've heard that with this sweater, there's like 15 to 20 ends to weave in. And yeah, already like just at the start, you are picking up stitches and then cutting the yarn, and you are knitting, a few rows and then cutting the yarn again. So there's a lot of ends to weave in already. But I'm probably just going to wait till the end to weave them in, as I typically do, in case anything changes while I'm knitting. I just really hate unpicking my ends if I have to do that later, so I prefer to just weave them all in at the end. I'm liking the yarn so far. I think this gauge is a little dense for holding the worsted weight with a mohair, which, by the way, I did go down another needle size. So I am knitting this on a 4mm, and I think the pattern calls for a 5.5mm needle. So clearly Ozetta is a much tighter knitter than I am, but I think mostly what's going on is that I added that strand of mohair. And the pattern originally calls for 2 strands of fingering weight held together with a lace weight, so like with a mohair. And I could probably achieve that gauge with just the worsted weight yarn, but I'm holding it with the mohair. So I'm definitely adding some bulk, and I think that is why I had to go down 3 needle sizes. Another thing with the gauge is that I am rowing out a little bit. It's not too bad. I am pretty confident that this will block out just as it did with my swatch, so I'm not like worried about it, but I'm noticing that, especially with how dense of a gauge this is with the yarn combination that I'm using, I think you can see it even more, like it's sort of highlighting the fact that my purl rows are a little bit looser. This is just something that I typically deal with, and I think for the most part I don't notice it very much because of the gauge that I usually knit at. But again, with such like a dense gauge, I think it is more noticeable. And of course, when I switch to knitting in the round, that won't be a problem. So we'll see. Hopefully my gauge doesn't change too much when I do that. But right now I just have a few more increase rows to go, and then I think I'll just continue knitting for the rest of the back yoke, and then switch to the front yoke. I'm ready to jump back in and get a lot done on it. This sickness that I had, it was just a head cold, but it knocked me out. Like I was not able to knit. Now I can actually get back into it. But I have been enjoying knitting this a little bit while I watched the Olympics. So it has been fun to work on, and I really love the color, so I'm still liking my yarn choice. Okay, I'm gonna go so you don't have to listen to my voice anymore. I'll check in when I get to the next part of the pattern. It has been a few days since I last checked in. I have made some pretty good progress. My voice is still hanging on by a thread a little bit. I have been resting it after work today in preparation for this clip, but because I'm talking at work all day, it just doesn't really get a chance to recover. So I just sound like this now, but here's where I'm at. I have joined the yoke in the round, so I'm working on the body now, and the yoke is completely done. So here's what the front V-neck looks like, the shoulders and the back. I think the shape of the yoke is looking good. I have not tried it on yet, but I probably will once I get a little bit further into the body. So I'm just working in the round now. When I joined in the round, I did go up a needle size because I noticed like how badly I'm rowing out with this yarn combination, and at this gauge, I decided to go up a needle size to try to maintain somewhat of the same gauge between the flat yoke and the body that's in the round. And I'm only like a few rounds in, but I think so far this is working. I think if I stuck with the same needle size, it would be a little too tight, and I just don't want to risk creating like a weird stiff fabric. And as for my time, I switched my timer. So I was using just the app on my phone, like the stopwatch app, but I needed to use that for something else. And I remembered that the free version of Knit Companion has a timer for each project. And luckily, because I was following the pattern for the entire yoke, it had recorded all of the time that I spent working on this. So I've now just switched over to using the Knit Companion app timer, and it says that I am at 9 hours and 29 minutes. So I put a few more hours in to finish up the yoke, and now I'm sailing along. This is the perfect project now for work meetings, for engaging TV, or just any time I need mindless knitting. And because the gauge is so large, I am able to make pretty quick progress. I feel like anyone who's not a knitter might find that surprising. Like they might think that that's a lot of time spent so far, but because I finished the entire yoke, like that's actually pretty fast to me. However, now I've made it to like the boring part. Like this was the fun part, was like following the pattern and switching things up and doing different shaping the entire time. And now I'm just gonna be knitting boring stockinette. But like I said, it's good for those times when I do actually need a boring project. So I'm just gonna keep going. And obviously continue to time how long it takes. I have broken into the second Mohair skein and the third heavy Merino skein. So that's where I'm at on yarn. I believe I ordered 9 skeins of the heavy Merino and 5 of the soft silk Mohair, since there's more yardage in the Mohair. So I think I'll be totally fine as far as yardage goes. I don't see any issues. I'm just gonna keep plugging away, and I'll check in when something interesting happens.
Okay, I am checking in at exactly the 16-hour mark. And I've just been working away on the body, and I finally made it to the ribbing. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to show you what I have so far. So the pattern has you knit the body in stockinette for 8¼ inches, and then you start the ribbing, and that's a little over 3 inches. So it's a bit long for the ribbed hem, I would say, just compared to like a lot of sweaters, but I like that about this. And it is just 1x1 rib. So that is where I'm at. I'm just a few rounds into the ribbing. I also wanted to show my gauge. So I mentioned how I was really rowing out on the flat yoke, and you can definitely see it. And you can also see where I switched to knitting in the round. There's like a visible line. It's definitely more visible on camera than it is in person, but you can see how the rest of my tension just looks so much nicer being knit in the round. So I just wanted to show like the comparison there. But I do think that it was good that I went up a needle size for knitting in the round, because I don't think you really notice any gauge difference here. Like obviously you notice when the rowing out stops, but I think the body would look a little bit too tight, a little too dense if I had stuck to the same needle size, the 4mm. And I'm trying something new with the ribbing where I didn't go down a needle size. I'm just knitting the ribbing on my US 7s. 4.5mm, because I don't want the waist to cinch in at all, especially because it's a longer rib. So I would like it to just kind of flow with the rest of the sweater body. In the past, to get the same effect, I have added stitches. So I've gone down several needle sizes to knit the ribbing, but I've either increased the amount of stitches or I've picked up more stitches depending on like which direction I'm knitting. And that is a nice way to get the same effect where your ribbing looks neat and tidy, but it doesn't cinch in because you've accounted for the shrinkage that you get in the ribbing. But that does require you to know your gauge in both stockinette and the rib stitch with all the needle sizes that you're using. And I just didn't want to go to that level of effort for this, to be honest. I think that I will still get a rib that looks neat enough for me by just sticking with the same needle size. So this is a little experiment. I'm trying it out. We'll see how it goes. I know for the neckband, you do go down 2 needle sizes, and I probably will do that for the neck. Because I do want that to like cinch in and sit really nice. But if this works out with the hem, I will stick with the same needle size for the sleeve cuffs as well. So it'll just be the neck that is a different needle size. So I'm 16 hours in, and honestly, that feels very fast to me. I am starting to feel like I'm basically done with this sweater, which is obviously not the case, but I think because it knit so fast, I'm just like, yeah, I'm almost there. I have a lot of ribbing in my future. Like I said, I think it's over 3 inches of ribbing for the hem, but I'm just gonna knit until I think the sweater is a good length on me, and then I will do an Italian bind off. That is always worth the time involved to do that for me. So I will definitely do that. And then maybe I will pick up the neckband before doing the sleeves because it will pull the sleeves up ever so slightly, and so then I'll be able to gauge sleeve length better. So I'll plan to do that and let you know how it's going. I have made it to the body bind off, so I've worked through 3.5 inches of ribbing. I think it looks pretty good. I think blocking it will help, but I'm not upset about how it looks with using the same needle size. I did go down 1 needle size to knit the final row before the bind off, just to keep the Italian bind off looking nice. And I have just started working on that, so this is gonna take me a little bit of time. But I, so far, am 18 hours and 45 minutes into this project. And I would say that I'm about 2/3 of the way done. So I have obviously the 2 sleeves to go and then the neckband. Once I finish binding off, the bind off is gonna take me probably a good hour to finish it. So, you know, we're still hours away from finishing this project, but I have been working on this for just about 3 weeks now. And I'm pretty amazed at how fast it's worked up, especially given that the start of this project was a little bit chaotic with traveling and then getting sick. So I feel like I've only been working on this for maybe like 2 to 2.5 weeks. When I started the Italian bind off, I was holding the 2 strands together like I have been for the whole project. And I got this far before I was like, this sucks to hold the mohair while doing this, because the mohair will knot up on itself so easily. And it was like very frustrating. And I was like, you know what? I bet you're not gonna notice if I just do the Italian bind off in the heavy merino and I drop the mohair. So that's what I did, and we're gonna find out what it looks like. And I'm really hoping that it's not that noticeable, but I figured I may as well try it and let you know. And I don't work with mohair very often, so maybe this is something that people have already like totally figured out and I'm just behind the times. But regardless, I will let you know. Obviously, I'll show you up close how it looks. And we have this little section where I did hold it with the mohair to compare. So I will just be working on my Italian bind off. I don't really mind the Italian bind off. It's a little tedious, of course, to like pull all of this yarn through every single stitch, but I totally think it's worth it. And it's just one of those bind offs for me where like it takes the time it takes, and like I'm not upset about it. I feel like it looks so much nicer to me than other bind offs that don't take as long, so it is worth every minute. And it is so much easier without the mohair. My god, it is like a night and day difference between holding that mohair and having it get all tangled with every single stitch. So I will continue working on my bind off. And then, yeah, from there, I am going to pick up for the neckband so I can see what that looks like before I finish the sleeves. Okay, I don't think that you notice that I'm not holding the strand of mohair, especially if you look at it from a little bit of a distance. So I say this is a win. I finished the bind off. It took me a little over an hour to do that. And then I immediately picked up for the neckband. The neckband is folded over, so when you go to bind off, you pick up and knit a stitch from the base of the neckband, and then you knit that together with your stitch and you bind off each stitch as you go. When I did mine, I decided to pick up the stitches on the other side of where I originally picked up my stitches, so you'll see the ridge of stitches that I picked up. And then to bind off, I'm just going on the other side, so I'm encasing that ridge in my neckband. Typically, I have done it where I've picked the stitches up at the base of where the neckband starts, and it looks pretty messy inside, and it's not like that has bothered me because it's inside so you don't really see it. But occasionally when I'm looking at the inside of my sweaters and kind of examining my work, I see it, and I don't love it. I don't love the way it looks. So this was something that I was trying out, and I don't know if it's that helpful for others, but it's the way I decided to do it, and I do think it looks really nice. So here is the inside. It's unblocked, and I feel like my bind off is not super neat, but otherwise it looks like a nice clean seam. And I always try to do my bind off and my knit two together is pretty loose, so that's why it looks a little bit messy looking, like the actual stitches themselves. But I don't know, I feel like I might do that in the future. Everything was still lined up in a nice way, and it was easy to tell, you know, where I was supposed to be picking up. Here's the inside of the V-neck. I also trapped a few of my ends as I sewed this up.
which I had forgotten that I said I was going to count all of my ends. So that kind of ruined that plan. I think I only had 4 ends that I ended up like hiding, 3 or 4, something like that. So here's the finished neckband. It's a little thick, it's a little chunky, which I knew it would be because this is a worsted weight yarn with a mohair. So it's pretty dense, but I do like it. I think it looks nice. And I have just barely started on my first sleeve, and I'm gonna do a time check. Let's see where I'm at. Okay, I am at 25 hours and 53 minutes. So this sweater will probably take me closer to the 40-hour mark than the 30. Sleeves have a way of taking longer than you think they should. It is like 1/3 of the sweater in total, so it's not an insignificant amount. There's an interesting way that Ozetta does sleeves. As I mentioned, I've knit one other pattern, the port cardigan, which is a drop shoulder, and that pattern also has this technique. But Ozetta adds short rows to the top of the sleeve cap just to help shape the cap a little bit more. I mean, there's really not much shaping going on here at all. So it just adds a little bit to help the sleeve form to your shoulder and to the top of your arm. And I do like that. It's not difficult to do. It doesn't take very long. And so it's nice to just add a few short rows and have the pattern, tell you what you need to do. All right, should we do a little try on? I can't believe I'm just now trying on this sweater. I've definitely been very one track minded with this project. So let's see, hopefully it fits. Okay, that's pretty cute. What do we think? Yeah? The sleeves are looking a little big, but maybe it's just because they're sticking off of my shoulder like that. So I think once I get some more length on them and once I block this, that will not be an issue. But I really like the neckline. Like I said, it's a little puffy, but that's because I decided to knit with such thick yarn. And I think it matches the vibe of the sweater. This is clearly a thick, dense sweater, so I think it works. I have seen people who have knit this sweater decide to rip out the double folded neckband and just keep it as a single layer. And I kind of wondered if I might want to do the same, but I think I like it actually. For a chunky, cozy sweater, I think it looks really nice. But it is quite thick, so who knows? I'll have to think on it. Okay, I'm coming at you with a quick update because we are about to head out to go see Project Hail Mary. I'm actually so excited. It's been a long time since I've been to the movie theater. I hated the book, but I'm convinced that I'm gonna like the movie. I guess hate is a little strong. I maybe didn't hate it, but there were a lot of things I did not like about the book. Mostly that all the characters were caricatures, but I also remember, it's been a while since I've read it, but I remember thinking that I wanted it to go deeper into the linguistics aspect, and it just really didn't for me. Anyway, we'll see if the movie's good. But I wanted to check in because I have finished the decreases on my sleeve and I've just now started the cuff. The sleeve is 12 inches before you start the cuff, and I measured mine, it's exactly 12 inches, and then I believe the cuff is 3.5 inches. And so I am working on that. I did go down a needle size for the ribbing because I do want it to cinch in a little bit more at the cuff of the sleeve, but overall, I think it's a pretty decently sized sleeve. It looks kind of short when you look at it like this, but that's because the shoulders are pretty long, and so that adds length to the sleeve. But wow, I'm getting so close to finishing this, and I feel like I could maybe finish it this weekend. So that's kind of my loose goal. We do have a very busy weekend, so I don't know if that's too ambitious, but I do feel like the first sleeve took me no time at all. I'm at 28 hours and 52 minutes. So what was that, 2 hours for the sleeve? Is that right? I can't remember what the timer was at last I checked in. I think it was 26 hours. I think that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to show you that I finished, or I've almost finished the sleeve, and then I'll do the Italian bind off on the sleeve cuffs as huge. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about where I'm at, just on Sleeve Island, even though it doesn't really feel like an island. It feels like a beach. I'm on Sleeve Beach. Like, I'm just chilling by the ocean, having a good time in the sun. Okay, we are gonna head out to the movies. I'm not gonna take this. This is too much to take, but I am gonna try to bring a smaller project and see how much I'll actually get done on that, because I'm definitely getting popcorn, so my hands are gonna be a little busy. But I will let you know my thoughts on the movie. I'm so happy that my prediction about the movie being better than the book was right, because I really liked the movie. I like it for all the reasons that everyone else is liking it. I think it was well acted. I think the story was well told. The visuals were really cool. The soundtrack also kind of took me by surprise. I was not ready for it to be as good as it was. And I liked some of the changes that they ended up making, even though I would say it is very close to the book. And if you liked the book, I think you will like the movie. One of my favorite scenes was the karaoke scene. I did not know that Sign of the Times was a Harry Styles song. That song just fit so perfectly into that moment for me. And I love that they just fully sent it and spent several minutes on that scene. It definitely had like a bigger emotional impact on me than the book. I liked all that the book was doing, and I think the science is really interesting. It just ended up falling flat for me, and I think the movie helped kind of fill in those gaps. Here's the hat project that I worked on. I knit about half of this during the movie, which is pretty good considering, as I mentioned, I did get a large popcorn that I shared, but I was eating popcorn for like half of the movie. But I was able to get more knitting in than I thought I would. This is a spin cycle yarn. I think it's the colorway Dead Reckoning, and I'm knitting the Manhattan Light hat by Tori Yu. Now for my not so fun updates. I am working on the second sleeve, and I am currently just over 33 hours into this project, and time is relative because that first sleeve somehow flew by for me. The second sleeve is the biggest slog. I think I've spent almost 2 weeks working on this. That is crazy. This is like my main knitting project. I don't know. I don't know why it's not going faster, but it has been really difficult to motivate myself to pick this up. We have been very busy lately. The weather is getting nice, and so we've just spent a lot of time doing things outside of the house. And that can sometimes affect my motivation because I am pretty tired by the end of the day and I don't really want to knit. But when I'm feeling like that, I can usually at least motivate myself to pick up my needles and get a little bit of progress made. And little by little, that progress adds up and I feel like I'm making a dent in my project at least. But even though I've gotten this far, this just doesn't feel like I'm almost done. But I really am. I only have a few more repeats to go of the decreases, and then I will start the ribbing. I'm probably about an hour, maybe an hour and a half total away from being done with this entire sweater. 2 more rounds before I bind off. You'll never guess what just came off the blocking mats. The sweater I've been working on this whole video. Wow. Maybe you did guess that. It is almost complete. I still need to weave in the ends, but it's all blocked. It's looking pretty good. There's one thing that I am gonna try to improve before I weave in the ends, and that is my rowing out
that happened in the yoke. It didn't quite block out all the way as I was hoping, so I'm gonna try to steam it and see if that helps like target the fibers to relax them. It's not terrible. It's subtle, but I do think that you can see some of the inconsistency in my gauge and my tension here that I would like to fix if possible. Okay, it needs to dry, obviously, but I do think that helped at least a little bit. Yeah, I think that did help. I'm still a little bit surprised that simply blocking it didn't fix the problem. Maybe if I had blocked it in some hotter water, that would have blocked it out, but when in doubt, steam it out, right? Okay, before I weave in the ends and show you the final time it took to make this sweater, I do want to try it on because I just can't wait. Okay, blocking actually helped relax this fabric so much. I really, really like the way that this sits. It has just enough drape, but it still has the structure that it needs. And wow, I really like it. I really like the heavy merino with the mohair. My swatches all blocked out nicely, but you just never know like how that's actually going to translate into a full sweater. And I was a little bit nervous that this yarn was still gonna be a little bit stiffer. I think the mohair is doing a lot here. Like, I love knitting for all of heavy merino, but it is a very crispy yarn. It doesn't drape like this, and I feel like this pattern was a really good choice with this yarn combo because you don't want something like this to just like stick off of you. You want it to kind of conform to your body and have a little bit of drape and movement. So I think I accomplished that with this combo, which is really great. Okay, I promised you a count of how many ends that I have to weave in at the end of this because there are a lot of ends. That is one slight criticism I have of the pattern. I don't know if it's a full criticism because there's not a ton that you can do as a designer to prevent having a lot of ends to weave in. It really just depends on the construction. I think there were maybe a couple of changes that Ozetta could have made to prevent this many ends, and it wouldn't really have affected the final design that much. But like, I'm not gonna complain anymore about the amount of ends because it just is what it is. But I will count them because I think this is the most that I've ever had on a sweater. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19. And then I'm estimating about 4 ends that I trapped in the collar and forgot to count. So that is gonna be 23 ends total. For such a basic single color sweater, that feels like a lot. Okay, I'm gonna make sure that my timer is running while I weave in all of these ends, and I'll be right back. Okay, that took just under 20 minutes, which brings my total time spent on this sweater to 36 hours and 4 minutes. Honestly, not bad. That is less than a 40-hour work week spent working on this. I did cast this on over a month ago though, which if you take my recent video of timing how many hours I knit in a week and average that out and then subtract some hours because I am working on some other projects, that's about where I would expect it to be. So there you go, under 40 hours to knit this sweater. Now for my favorite part, modeling it to take photos. All of the things that I was a little bit nervous about in this sweater ended up not being something that I needed to worry about. The collar, I was a little bit unsure about the double thickness, especially as I mentioned, because I made my gauge a little bit denser than what's in the sample. So I wasn't sure if this was gonna be just like weird, but I actually think it's totally fine. I don't think it looks too thick, and it also doesn't feel too thick. You know when sometimes something just feels like very chunky? I'm not getting that. It just feels like I'm wearing a sweater. I don't notice it. So I think that is a great sign that this is going to be a very wearable sweater. Another thing I did not need to worry about that I kind of wish I would have just left alone in retrospect is I didn't go down a needle size for the bottom hem ribbing because I was worried about the ribbing cinching in too much with this yarn combo, and it doesn't at all. In fact, because I didn't go down a size, it has a very slight flare. As I said when I made the decision to do that, this was an experiment, and the conclusion is that I just didn't need to worry about that. This yarn relaxed enough with blocking that I don't think it would have cinched in at the waist. But I really like the length of the sweater. I like the length of the sleeves. I stuck completely to pattern for both of those. It hits me just above the widest part of my hips, which is a good length for me with most of the pants styles that I wear. That being said, it does have a little bit of shaping. Obviously the short rows on the sleeve help shape the sleeve cap, the shoulder area, but there is also a little bit of shaping down here at the bottom of the arm side, and that definitely helps. So it is nice to have those shaping elements. It's not just a square here. It has a little bit of conformity to your shoulder and upper arm area while still definitely being an oversized look. Another thing I wanted to follow up on was the bind off. I will show you a comparison of binding off with the mohair versus just using the single strand of heavy merino. I don't think there's much of a difference at all. And in fact, after I bound off the body and maybe a sleeve, I was watching one of my favorite YouTubers, Mel Make Stuff, and she said that you can just bind off without the mohair strand. And if she blesses that technique, then I'm all for it. So I'm definitely going to use that in the future. I think there's no reason to put yourself through the torture of binding off using your strand of mohair because I really don't think that you notice at all. The last thing is that this yarn combo is actually not as hot wearing it as I expected it to be. I get a little bit nervous using mohair because it does tend to be very warm. Our winters do get pretty cold, so I like a nice warm sweater, but if I'm going inside somewhere that has heat, I do tend to get pretty sweaty. However, I actually feel fine in this right now. It's 70 degrees in my house. I have full sun in my windows, which has totally heated up my house. And before this, I was in a t-shirt. And I've been in this sweater for, I want to say about 45 minutes now, and I'm not feeling too bad. So I'll have to keep testing this out this fall and winter as I wear it and see if this is a good combo for me. It's definitely making me feel better about my decision to combine them because for a while there, I was just knitting at such a dense gauge and I was really worried about this sweater just trapping in every ounce of body heat. I have a sweater knit out of Sandnes Garn Borsted Alpaca that does that, and it basically makes it unwearable because I have to take it off when I go places. But so far, I'm giving this yarn combo 2 thumbs up, and I'm really happy that I get to add this to my hand knit wardrobe. I love the V-neck and the collar. I think it looks really nice. It was fun to knit. So thank you, Ozetta, for another successful sweater, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.